So thank you very much for the invitation and for my, I think it's third or fourth time I have the possibility to be in contact with the Institute Intercultural Dialogue. But let me say a few words before I begin, and I have to say that I will not change my speech. I have prepared my speech, and this is also a good opportunity to raise some questions you really want to put on the table for debate. But afterwards, I will make a few, if the chair accepts, a few comments about the morning discussion about this question of so-called migration, that people are afraid for newcomers, etc. But I will do it in the end. The European Economic and Social Committee is a rather unknown institution in the EU system, but it was created from the beginning when the Rome Treaty was set up. And this year, this committee could celebrate their 60th anniversary day. I know that we have a lady from a small country, but very important country in the middle of Europe, who knows very well what the EESC is for. But we were as member not elected. So the EESC is an advisory body. Nowadays, it could be recognized that it is an advisory body, 350 members, for what we call civil society organizations. You have the social partners, employers, business, trade unions, and a lot of other diverse civil society organizations. We have the possibility, obligation to give opinions like the European Parliament, but the European Parliament has become a very strong tool in the system of European Union. The committee is an advisory body, and they are appointed and not elected. That should be remembered. For me, it's a pleasure to be in Berlin, the city of Germany, and nowadays I think we can say the city of Europe. And I would like to thank ICD for the invitation to this Berlin Economic Forum and the opportunity for me to make my contribution to a debate. And as I was introduced, my focus will be the link between economy, economic development, and rural development. But let me also make a comment about this concept of cultural diplomacy. And you raised, the young lady, a very good question about what is the interpretation, how different is the interpretation of the cultural diplomacy. But I think it's an established concept and can be used and in another way than the more traditional diplomacy. What we now see inside the European Union and also in the global context is a time which needs much more of what we call cultural diplomacy, much more of building understanding between countries, states, but also between people. So I think the cultural diplomacy in this institute play a crucial role for the future. So let me congratulate ICD for what you are doing when it comes to education and what you are doing in all other areas so successfully. But I also want very much to welcome the fact that the European Commission 2016 produced the communication. You know that when the European Union produces a communication, it's the first step in the process if you want to have regulation or whatsoever. And the title was International Cultural Relations. And there are three approaches in this communication. Support culture as a motor for sustainable social and economically development. And I repeat, economically development also. To promote culture and international culture dialogue for peaceful relations between people. And to strengthen cooperation on cultural heritage. We have the speak before the lunch about the heritage, and this is also a part of the possibility to have a cultural dialogue. Some may say that culture dialogue is in European Union more for the member states, but I think European Union can really play a global role in the context of this strategy. I am afraid that when we speak in an economic forum on economic development and growth, we are caught in the urban norm, that we almost automatically think of the macroeconomic plan. And when I read my newspapers, and especially economic newspapers, they are very much focused on the major multinational companies and the stock market's development up and down. But there is much more below that surface. That I choose to associate my intervention with something different, the relationship between our economy and our countryside. Perhaps not always different, but very much, in my opinion, neglected and not seen in an economic context. But allow me to make a comment to what I mentioned as the urban norm. The consequence is that the development of the society, the city's development, is on the first place and on the higher stage. The city becomes the norm and stands as the most important economic development and as the right one. The city becomes nurturing, active, independent, innovative, and rich its opportunities. All clever people live there. I can tell you a story, because 40 years ago, I moved to a very small village, very small, 25 people perhaps, 24 today perhaps. But there was a teacher in the neighbor, a little bigger village, saying, okay, you move there, but all clever people has already left. And that was perhaps not the most nice welcome word when you were totally new in a village. But the countryside, if you compare with the urban norm, stands, as I see it, opposed to the periphery, a dying, passive village that is addicted and stagnant. I had in my country 2 years ago a polarized strong debate with the author for a book called Urban Express. And the message is all clever people want to be in megacities in the future, living and wanted. In the debate, I asked him, okay, it's interesting maybe, but why do we have so much cars, so much car queues during midsummer, winter sports holidays, Christmas, etc., trying to leave the urban area to go to the countryside? He didn't answer. A very typical and stereotypical way is that when investing public and private money, resources in the city is described as development, innovation, and investment. When we see the same description about rural scenes, there will be subsidy, support, and contribution. Unfortunately, it is very easy to overlay this image when reviewing how it's often written in public papers and in documents. In some economic terms, urban areas seen economically developing, rural areas in seeing going back. But from my point of view, it's not always the truth. I will come back later on this. However, I don't want to build an opposition between urban and rural areas, cities and countryside. But we need to know how we look at the city and the countryside. We need to see a balance between cities and rural areas, even when we look at where we have the economic development and growth. All our natural resources come from the countryside. Food, of course, but in principle, all natural resources we need and use. All energy, renewable energy, come from countryside. Hydropower is there. The forest grows there. All mining resources is there. In economic terms, it doesn't look so. The added value usually ends where the headquarter is located, cities, urban areas. Although taxation is different in our European countries, it is more than just an exception that the economic value is ending up and taxing is done where the headquarters of the company is situated. So rural areas, that's my view, deliver, and the urban area take the added value from the natural resources. In my country, we have a small municipality, far in the north, in the England, few people, but they produce 10% of our hydropower. They are one of the poorest municipalities now. If they had the taxation of the hydropower, they would be the richest municipalities. If we go to the food production, it's of course natural that it is mostly done in rural areas, even if you know that we have young movements calling for urban growing. But it's of course not a realistic way that the cities could be self-sufficient. Let me give another example for a study done by a university and economic school in my country. We have factories for food production in 285 of 290 municipalities. They employed 50,000 people, and 40% of them had their workplaces in small cities. We have lost 20% on the last 15 years in the labor market for this food production. But you can see in reality the loss of the workplaces was not done in the city. It was done in the city. I mean the opposite. It was not done in the countryside. And even if you look for the growth of exports, it was done in the countryside. But we have to remember in rural areas and in smaller towns, many innovative, dynamic and skilled small and medium-sized companies, but they are very often not recognized and seen in the media context as economic development, often focus on larger and publicly traded companies. But if you look for the productivity, which is an important for all companies and for the economic growth, you can see the productivity in the agriculture sector is one of the strongest in the past. For me, it's important to say that I am in favor of globalization. Trade barriers, which were discussed this morning, and security duties do not lead to more long-term competitive economic development. This is perhaps a very small message to a very big country. But we have to remember that globalization have also provided the opportunity for millions of people to go from the lowest poor level to better living conditions. But from the area of civil society where I come from, I know that a lot of organizations are working against globalization. There is often a message that food should not be traded, but we have to rely on the figures from WTO, that it is not more than in general 10% of food which is in trade, in the global trade. And coming back to the intercultural dialogue, I think even food and new tastes could be a tool for intercultural dialogue. Some of you are probably educated in economics. And you remember that in the past, 300 years ago, a long time ago, but there was an economic theory called mercantilism. Just after, if anybody remember, there came what was called physiocrats. Yes, but the physiocrats, they had it's a little strange because they only recognized agriculture as a growing sector. Unfortunately, in my view, they died out. It's a pity, perhaps. But it's too easy to make this theory between. But we have to remember that this was a very interesting national economic theory. However, I hope that rural development in the future will be seen as part of the growing economy in our country, all our countries around the globe. Before I give you the possibility for a new upload, I will make some few comments about this morning discussion about this question of migrants, newcomers, etc. First of all, I think it's a shame for the European Union that we couldn't, the Council, member states, couldn't agree on how to solve this on a fair and balanced way. I think it's a shame. And I want to make a distinction between migrants, economic migrants, and refugees. We have also skilled migrants. I want to see that as a different, because by our international agreement, there is a right to seek asylum. This should be still respected. And I don't know how many remember or know, perhaps Matti, that 200 years ago or less, 1/3 of the Swedish population left the country. We had very poor circumstances. People couldn't feed themselves. 1/3, 1 million left, mostly to the United States, Ireland, and some other countries. And of course, the people wanted to be well treated when they come to the new countries. So I hope that we all make it possible to find a reasonable solution for a world as it looks today. And that people, and I'm afraid that people normally think that it's people neglected in the countryside who works against newcomers or people who want to come. They are afraid. It's not always true. I can give a lot of good examples of small groups in the countryside who has taken initiative to welcome, to make the language cafe, to make events happening for the newcomers. It would be a great opportunity. And I even think in economic terms, we can need newcomers. That's my point. If you don't upload, I'll continue.
Mr. Nilsson, you have received the applaud. Now you have to receive questions. Nothing comes without a prize. There is, for 10 applause, there is one question. So, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Mr. Nilsson for the very, very enlightened and concise speech that we heard. For me, it was very educational. And I would extremely appreciate if we have 1 or 2 questions in order to stick to the schedule.
If not, I was too clear.
If not, yes, we have to offer another applaud, but this time it has to be louder. The lady?
Hi, my name is Aliena. I just have a question about, so young people tend to go to the city because that's where jobs are, that's the appeal of what's done. But then 10 years or so later, when they're looking to build a family, then they go back to more rural areas. Do you think there's potential in that they could maybe bring a part of the business they work in back with them when they leave to maybe lighten the commute as well and make it still possible for a young family to keep up working if they've now decided to move to the rural environment?
It could be a possibility. It depends very much on, of course, on if we have the right conditions in the countryside. I mean, if you don't have high-speed connections, if you don't have good infrastructure, if you don't have good services, it will be more difficult also for young people to go back. But it is absolutely a great opportunity. And I can see that when we now have fiber for high-speed connection, we have much more possibilities for distance work. You can work from home some days in the week before you go to a workplace. In a lot of cases, not always. It is an opportunity, but when we discussed this very important education, I agree with what was said about the education and need. The risk is when you go to the education, then you establish the life, so it could be even more difficult. But we can also see in different member states that there is high school, not only in the really big cities, but it is also distributed around the countryside or smaller cities. Thank you for your question. Going back, hopefully.
Well, during your answer to the question raised for me, I was following that there is a problem. When in 1995 we discovered internet, that was one of the major technological developments in the history of humanity. I started to think as an economist, God bless us. Now we find a way that you can stay at your home without living to the big towns, and you can be educated, you can be modern, you can participate in the economic and social life. But I can tell you, from 95 to 2015, the concentration of population, urbanization is going much more faster. I was disappointed on my first article on that, on my first book written 20 years ago, that nothing happened. And my question is your opinion, why it does happen? Even fiber, I'm not sure that it's going to happen.
I am, of course, in some way realistic, and that what I was very keen on to say, that I don't want to see a contradiction between rural areas and urban areas. We need both. And I can see the benefits also for cities. But if you Google urbanization in Europe, in European Union, you can find out that the most rapid urbanization is in my country. My country is Sweden. But if you look for the figures, the last 3 decades, people don't leave countryside. But, there is always a but, unfortunately. There is more newborn children in cities. There is more that newcomers stay in cities, even if we have other examples. So that's by the statistics. We have an urbanization, but the level of people in the countryside are the last 30 years very modest.
Stable?
Yes.
Unfortunately, we have to give a very light approach and proceed to the next speaker. It's a very interesting topic. I'm sure we could tire Mr. Nilsson with questions, but I have to proceed with the next speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Thank you very, very much.